Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be so good.
I know, I know, I know. I was like, I have to hit record because I was about to ask you a question and I knew you were going to give up the goods, the gold. So I was like, hold on. Let's just hit record. I'm so excited to talk to you today. And what I was about to ask you, um, I know I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I just recognized I really wanted to talk to you today because I recognized in the last couple of years that maybe the missing or maybe an additional element that would enhance my life was movement. There's that book, Vander something that wrote The Body Keeps
Bessel
Us.
Bessel van der Kolk. I'm reading it right now. I'm
Are you
halfway through it
really?
right now. I love it.
Ooh, that was a little serendipitous.
Yeah.
But I know from all the things that I read that the issues are in the tissues. Yoga is good for your body. There's some somatic practices. I know the trauma is stored in the body. And I was like, you know what? I really kind of need to spend some extra time on this. And your assistant or PR people reached out to me and they were like, oh, you got to talk to this guy. As soon as I read your thing, I was like, wow. It's like I have just manifested you into my life. So because you do Qigong, am I saying that right?
You are saying that correctly. And I've
Okay.
heard many different pronunciations of it. I've heard everything from Qigong to
Uh-huh.
Qui-Gong to so many different things. But yeah, it's Qigong. Yeah.
It's Qigong. And you're the
Mhm.
expert because you went to grad school for Chinese medicine. That's
I did. I
amazing.
did. I went for a period of time. I did not graduate. I did a semester.
Okay.
And I
You're a doctor.
realized, and then no, and then I realized that it wasn't the right path for me. But the
Ah,
reason why I was there ultimately
yeah.
was to learn this, was to be introduced to and learn this practice of qigong. That's that. And in hindsight, I can recognize that that is why I was there. And so once
Isn't
I
that
took that,
amazing?
I accepted that. I took that, and I moved on to massage school
Ah,
and built a career around that, and qigong has changed my life and changed my recovery. So
and you found it, did you find it 10 years in? Do I have that right?
yeah, about 10 years in, I found qigong while I was in grad school. And if I can tell you the story a bit, it was a really intense time because I had worked so hard to get into grad school. I thought that becoming a Chinese doctor was what I was supposed to do. I just
Mhm.
felt like I knew it, like I knew the back of my hand. And that I started to tell everyone that that's what I was going to do. I knew that was what I wanted to do. And imagine the shock and the surprise and the terror I felt when I got there and started to have doubts. And those doubts were started off as a small, still voice, and then it became louder and louder and louder. And I think part of my isms is that if I start something, I got to finish it. There's no such thing as changing my mind. And that's what I was thinking. And so I was going through such an amount of stress around that process of being in school. I had panic attacks. I couldn't sleep at night. I couldn't eat. I was crying before I'd go to class. While I was sitting in my car, I'd be crying because I did not know what to do with what I was feeling. It dredged up so much stuff, ancient stuff. And one of the gifts of that program was being introduced to Qigong, because the Qigong allowed me to take all of that emotional energy that was
Mhm.
stuck in my body and move it
Move
and
it.
move it and also give me space in my body and give me space in my mind, where I was able to zoom out. Because when you're in it, you can't see anything beyond where you're at. It allowed me to zoom out and see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is, I was here, I was in that place to learn what I was there to learn, to deal with some of the stuff that had been part of me for a long time, old traumas, old issues, to look at it in a different way, from a different vantage point, and to use those tools to help me manage my energy. And that's what it did. And once I realized that, I was like, oh, well, I can do anything. I can be anything, and I can go anywhere. I don't have to stay here. It doesn't mean I could stay here. I actually would have been a great Chinese doctor if I felt like I really wanted to do that. I would have been fantastic. Um, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I moved towards what I was meant to do. And here I am with you today.
Can I just tell you, I got the chills from head to toe when you talked about that moment when you use the words shock and terror, when you realize, uh-oh, this isn't it, and there was something about that when you said that that just so resonated with me because it takes courage to let go of something that's not working for you. Maybe like I should be doing this, or I'm prepared for this. I'm sure you had to do a lot of work just to get there. And to be like, this ain't it. And then to find something else. It takes a lot of courage to shift gears like that. And really, I just admire your willingness and ability to follow your heart, to do what actually makes you happy. And I know that at 10 years of recovery and doing all the things that you did, like you really had to be connected to your feelings to be able to recognize the truth. Is that a fair statement? You had to be really connected?
I did.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when I hear you, thank you for everything that you said.
Yeah, yeah.
You reminded me of the fact that I came from a family where appearances was everything. And
Mm,
so what would it look like if I said and started to do this thing and then suddenly I'm not going to do it? Like, does that make me a quitter? Does that make me a failure? All that stuff that I was
mm,
carrying with me that was not serving me. I had to get rid of that. And one of the things that also helped me during that time was to reinvest in my recovery.
mm,
I I I I went to more meetings. I raised
mhm.
my hand and shared more. I had to let people know exactly what was going on, how I was feeling, because I was so afraid that I was going to relapse during that time because what I was
Ooh,
feeling was so intense. And I was like, something's got to give. Either I'm going to drink or I need to just dive into my program even more
mhm,
and be willing to get honest and be vulnerable and ask for help.
mhm.
And I did all that. And it was a miracle.
That's one of the benefits of long-term sobriety is that you are conditioned to some extent that when you're in crisis, not to pick up, but to reach for help, right? Like,
Yeah.
I just think that our tolerance for pain lessens with recovery, and that's actually a good thing. Because like, I know I can speak for myself that when I was getting loaded, my pain tolerance was pretty high. Like I tolerated so much crap that I wouldn't even think twice about dismissing now. If someone's rude or there's a toxic person, like how the promise intuitively know how to handle those situations, which used to baffle us. I intuitively know how to exercise the bullshit right out of my life. You know what I mean?
Yes. No is a
Yeah.
complete sentence.
I know it's a complete sentence. Although I usually have to add some kind of softener around that because I'm a total people pleaser, but progress, not perfection, right?
Exactly.
Um, I do want to take a step back. I know that you've been sober like 20 years. I have so many questions. You mentioned the program. Actually, I like to play a little game first. I think you're going to be amazing at it. Want to play?
What's that game?
Okay. It's
I
just
love a game.
I love the game. It's just a couple of quick questions to front load the episode with some resources because I am a big book lover. You wrote a book. We're going to talk about your book, but maybe you could identify or share what book or books helped you early in your recovery.
Mm, living sober.
Oh, that's a good one.
That helped me a lot because I didn't know how to live sober. I didn't know how to handle I didn't know how to handle those little things in life
Yeah.
where those situations where I so clung to drugs and alcohol that I didn't have any other alternatives. Like just the simple thing of like going to a party and as soon as you get there, get a glass of water or some drink in your hand so that you have something to do with your hands. And
Mm,
also so people see you with a drink so no one says, "Oh, what are you drinking?" or "Can I get you a drink?" And you don't have
yeah.
to go through all that. And just having that was just so simple, but yet so powerful.
Yeah.
So living sober was a great one. Um, of course, the 12 and 12 and the big book,
Love that
all those
one.
stories in the big book and just going through that with the sponsor, just reading and picking it apart. That was revelatory as
Yeah,
well.
that's a must to do it with a sponsor, I think.
Yeah. And
Or join
just
a
the,
book study. Did you ever go to book studies? Where
I
they,
did,
yeah,
I did.
those
And
were helpful.
that was always helpful. And then also, I think at that time I was also reading, I think a little bit of Iyanla Van Zant. I've always
Mm,
followed, excuse me, her, excuse me, her stuff. And there's another person that is on the tip of my tongue that I also used to read at that time. Oh, Pema Chodron.
ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I would read some things from her. And that's what comes to mind at the moment.
Yeah, I forget. Was there, I know she's written more than one. Do you recall the title of her book? The one that,
I don't. And I think I don't know if I sat down and read her stuff from cover to cover, but I would read excerpts. I know I had a friend at that time that we were maybe a year or two apart in sober time. And he's the one who turned me on to her. And I would borrow his books and just read some of it.
I just looked it up real quick. When Things Fall Apart. Is that the one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that may have been the one.
Yeah. I think I've read parts of that. Yeah, and it's so interesting when as you were talking about that, I will I'm not attached to reading an entire book. It sounds like you like to finish things. I'm not
Well, it
attached.
depends. I mean, some things I
Yeah.
start and some things, I started Drop the Rock and I didn't finish it. So,
Yeah. But sometimes you get the message, you kind of get what you need. I feel like books show up
yeah,
like when you need them. And then
yeah,
when you get the message, then it's okay to put it down. I don't always finish books, but
I agree
yeah,
with you.
permission to put it down after you got your message. So
Yeah. And you never know, you might pick it up another time when it feels right.
yeah, that's true. Do you have a go-to mantra or quote or an idea that has guided you in sobriety?
I am enough.
Ooh, wow, right. You know
I
what?
am
You
enough.
are amazing.
Oh,
That
bless
was,
you.
I mean, but that is like, I heard this lady say that one of the three original wounds is, or like like a core original wounds. I am alone. I'm not lovable because I'm too much, or I'm not enough, or I'm not worthy. And to me, I am enough. It's sort of like the antidote to all three.
Agreed.
Yeah, I
Agreed.
love that.
I have felt all that stuff, and that's why it's so important for me to keep it simple and
Yeah.
have a guiding mantra that helps me. It helps me as much today as it did back then.
Yeah, because still human.
Still human.
So, I love
Try as I might,
I
not
know, I
becoming
know.
superhuman or above it all.
Perfectionisms
Mhm.
unite. Perfectionists unite. That's awesome. And I like to ask people about their recovery routines, and that could be a morning practice, that could be like a weekly meeting schedule or an annual retreat. What does that look like for you?
Well, for me, it depends upon the day, but what I always start off with in the morning is just taking a few deep breaths. I always read some recovery-based literature. Like I get these emails from Hazelden that I've been getting since the day I got sober, and I
Mhm.
continue to read the daily inspirations from them. I also read a morning prayer, and then sometimes within the day it might include a meeting. Not always.
A 12-step
Uh,
meeting?
yeah, yeah. And I used to go to meetings more in the morning or early afternoon. But now it's been, since the pandemic, it's been like an evening thing for me. Like
Oh,
I have a meeting that I go to on Zoom called Radford Hall. As Radford Hall is a meeting place in the LA area, and they have a 10 p.m. meeting Pacific time every night, 7 days a week, called Radford Zombies.
at
And
what time?
10 p.m.
10
Pacific.
p.m.
Yeah.
Oh, you youngins.
I
That is the
know.
middle of the damn night for me.
I know. I know. I know. But it's all started during the pandemic, and it's such a great meeting. And there's usually about 160 people on it. And I think it's a meeting
Wow.
that started during the pandemic, and it just grew and grew and grew. And that's been a staple for me.
I know that there's going to be people that are going to be like, oh, I want to go to that meeting. Would you be open to sharing it? And I'll put it in the show
Yeah.
notes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
That would be so
absolutely.
awesome. Okay, I'll
Absolutely.
do that. And I
Yeah.
might one of these days when I can't sleep, I'll hop on.
Yeah, yeah.
Zombies, huh? That
But
seems
that's the
fitting.
great thing about this, what happened. I mean, as hard as the
Oh my
pandemic
gosh, I
was,
know.
the creation, I'm sure there were Zoom meetings online, before the pandemic came about, but just the proliferation of them during the pandemic was just incredible. Such a lifeline. I know that a lot of people got sober during that time.
Oh yeah.
I'd like to think that I could have gotten sober during that way, but I'm not quite sure, if because all I know is my own experience and being in a
Yeah.
room with people and having to put the hand on the handle and open the door and then go in and have a seat, and all that came with that was important for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm so grateful for Zoom meetings.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I had a women's meeting that I had started about maybe 6 months before. So we were kind of already rolling. I had a girlfriend who uh, is the founder of Line Rock Recovery. It was online recovery, and they struggled for like 10 years. And then COVID hit and their business tripled overnight. Yeah. So, and I know that I mean, there were blessings that came out of that really difficult experience. And I agree with you. The Zoom meetings, the proliferation of Zoom meetings is definitely one. I love online meetings.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'll ever stop going to
Oh,
online
me either.
meetings. But
Yeah.
one other thing that I wanted to say, because you asked me about my self-care
Oh,
routines in recovery, is there's always some element of movement throughout the day. And that's
movement.
any kind of mindful movement, any kind of physical practice. I need to get into my body. I need to feel my
Yeah.
body. I need to challenge my body. I need to stretch my body. I need to move the energy.
Yeah.
There's something about, just like the Qigong, any kind of movement gives me space in myself and also allows me to zoom out. And it makes me really present in the moment and not stuck in yesterday or tomorrow.
Mhm.
That's really important for me. And then at the end of the day, I always do some sort of self massage. I'm really big on massaging my feet.
Okay.
That's really been important for me. Rolling on a roller, all those things, just in terms of just releasing tension in my body, and again, an opportunity to be really present with my body. And like we talked about earlier, the issues are in the tissues.
Mhm.
The body keeps the score. So
The body
yeah,
keeps the score. That's another good one. Interesting. As soon as you said the feet massage, you were a dancer for many years. Is that right?
I was.
So you had to take really good care. I bet you beat your feet up a lot too.
I beat my feet up a lot. I beat my body up a lot. I was doing 8 shows a week. I don't know how I
Oh,
did it for almost just about a decade. And at the same time, during that first part of it, I was in the height of my addiction. I was drinking every night. I was doing coke,
oof.
smoking weed, whatever. I was putting
Yeah,
my body through it. So my feet got a beating, but so many more parts of myself
got
really
it worse.
suffered during that time.
Yeah, I could
Um,
see that. Well, we'll get into it. Last question for you.
yeah.
And I don't think I prepared you for this. So you could either think about it or I can give you an example. I'm really sort of zeroing in on people's spiritual experiences, whether it's a experience that you had that was so serendipitous that you were like, God's hand was in that. Um, I can give you an example of one if to jog your memory if you
Well,
unless something
yeah,
jumps to mind.
I think a few things
Okay.
have come to mind, but you can give me an example and I'll share with you
So
what's come up
this
to
was
me.
this I don't share this very often, but it was one of those things I walked away where like I cannot explain this any other way than to say that it was just like a spiritual experience. So I'm a long time sober. I have this meeting that I go to every Saturday. It's my favorite meeting. And I'm obsessively early, but for whatever reason, I'm late to this meeting. And I walk in, it's a packed packed room. I walk in right as this lady, they're asking about newcomers. Lady stands up and she's saying, I'm new to the meeting. I'm looking for a sponsor. And without thought, sound came out of my face. And I said, and I raised my hand. I said, right here. And everybody turns and looked at me because I walked in late. I was like making an entrance and everybody started laughing. And then she and I met after the meeting and we were talking and we were talking. I don't even know how we got on it, but it was like, oh, I went to this elementary school in like this other town far away. And I was like, oh, that's where I'm from. I went to that school too. And when did you go? And I was like, well, I have an older sister that went at this period of time. She's like, well, my younger sister went this period of time. Turns out they knew each other. Like my sister didn't have a whole lot of friends, but that was like her one friend that she had. It was this lady's sister. I was like, what is that? And then when we got into it and started working steps and stuff, she had a very specific thing come up for her that I can't really reveal, but it happened to me too. And I was like, what is happening? Right. I was like, the angels brought us together and we did really amazing work together. Like she and I just clicked and we processed through a lot of stuff together. So to me, that was like a spiritual experience. It was just like, there's no other way to explain how that happened.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love everything about that.
That was good, right?
Wow.
Does that trigger any
Well,
memories for you?
a few different things. I mean, one thing that it reminds me of is very similar to what you just described. And then there's another thing too that I would just like to share. The first thing is that when I left dancing professionally, I started teaching Pilates in New York City. And during my training, I would work with people and get practice bodies, and then eventually sometimes they would become clients. And I think I somehow reconnected with a high school friend on social media, and she's like, "Oh my goodness, you teach Pilates? Oh wow, I'm in New York too, and wow, yeah, and I work in that neighborhood." So she came in and started taking class with me. Come to find out, she's sober too. And at that point, I was maybe 5 years sober, maybe, I can't remember. But I just remember feeling such a sense of joy and relief that this person from my past has resurfaced and also gets some of my experience of being a recovering addict and alcoholic. And then I remember going to some meetings together in New York, and that's great. And I actually just saw her not that long ago in Austin, Texas. I was there for an event, and we met up, and she took me to a meeting. That was my first in-person meeting since the pandemic began. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
So that's one memory. And then I just remember being in the throes of my addiction. I was in my apartment that I had a studio apartment in Toronto, Ontario. I was in my first year of doing The Lion King. I was spiraling out of control. Nobody knew what was happening to me because I kept a lot of it silent and secret. But I was in my apartment drinking and drugging, and I just looked at myself in the mirror, and I had one of those moments of not just being able to recognize who I was looking at, because I was doing things that I never thought I would do. And I just remember saying, help me. And help didn't come immediately, but eventually it did come. But I never forget that moment I said help, because at that moment, I was able to clear away all the other things that were blocking me from the sunlight of the spirit. Like, for instance, focusing more on other people's problems than my own, thinking that, oh, so-and-so's got a problem with alcohol, but I'm fine. You know, in that moment, I was able to just say, no, it's you. Something is not right here. I didn't have the strength to stop that day, but that was the beginning of the end for me.
Would you consider that your moment of clarity?
Yeah, for sure. That was the first,
beautiful.
that was like I think that was the first one.
Yeah.
That was the first
And
one.
it's very rare that someone has their moment of clarity and then that's it.
Right.
it's often a period of I had that too. It's like I had a really bad night and it was like the next morning, it was like undeniable. I was like, something has to change. But it took me 2 years from that sort of moment of clarity to finding recovery. It's like
That
an
sounds,
idea that has to like sink in a little bit.
yeah, that sounds about right from my experience and other things that I've heard from other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
process. It's a
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. And the tracking the time, I have such mixed feelings about that because on one hand, it's good to, celebrate the wins and it makes you feel like you're gaining momentum and you see how far you've come. And it's um Dr. Oh gosh, her book is right behind me. Dr. Anna Lemke, she wrote Dopamine Nation.
I
Sh
don't know her. I gotta write that down.
oh my, yeah, she was amazing. She was on The Social Dilemma.
Ah, Anna
Yeah.
Lemke. Okay.
And Dr. Anna Lemke, she's out of Stanford. But she
Hmm.
talked about pro-social shame. She's an absolute advocate of the 12 steps, but she was talking about there is that thing about time that some of it sort of like encourages you to keep going. She calls it pro-social shame, but it's such a double-edged sword because I know some people feel so bad when they relapse that it becomes like an additional thing to overcome. So the whole measuring time can be problematic. Is that that year of, moment of clarity to when you finally was that tracking time, was that helpful or do you think it was hurtful to you?
I never thought about it that way. I, I want to say that it was helpful to me. I've never, I never really gave myself a hard time for having that moment of clarity and not being able to do anything about it. I just wasn't ready. I
Hmm.
wasn't ready to change. Things had to get worse for me to be willing to try something new to get better.
Yeah.
And when it got worse, I think about it, it wasn't like what happened the day that I got sober was any worse or any worse than any other day leading up to it. It was kind of like more of the same
Yeah.
and more of that like soul crushing sameness.
Soul crushing sameness.
Yeah, yeah, of
Yes.
using over and over and over and expecting a different result, like as if I was going to be able to master this time, or that I was going to be able to do this and not make more bad decisions this time. Not the case, not the case.
I think that's a very important question to answer. Can I moderate? Can I moderate? Sounds like the answer for you is no. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's a part of me that knew that I couldn't moderate because during those last couple of years, I did what they said we often do in the big book, like we'll try to control our drinking by doing this or not doing that. And the truth of the matter is, if you don't have a problem, you don't have to do all that stuff. You don't have to try all these tricks to drink or do whatever normally. You just don't.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
probably
I
don't
like
even
how you
think
said that.
about
You're
it.
like so smooth about it. You're like, normal people don't have to do that.
Yeah, I don't think so. I
I don't
really
think
don't
so
think
either.
so.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just kind of knew that um that wasn't going to work for me, that I needed to find a way to stop, because I
Okay.
also had a really good friend who was sober and he had long-term sobriety. And what I love about him, his name is Craig, is that he never forced sobriety on me. He never bragged about it. He just wore it like a really comfortable garment, and
Hmm.
it made him look really good. And so
Hmm.
when I found myself in trouble, um, I reached out to him. And so I thought, well, he's not moderating his like drinking. He just doesn't do it. And this is how
Yeah.
he doesn't do it. And so I thought, okay, maybe I should try what he's doing because it seems to be working.
Yeah. That's how it works. I love that.
Mhm.
Let's back this up a little bit. I'm so curious to hear, like, how did we get here? And oftentimes, addiction has an underlying root cause, like trauma. Sometimes you mentioned a little bit of, it sounded like a little bit of perfectionism growing up. And you can share as much as you or as little as you like, but I do, um, if you have experience with trauma or you have identified what your core issue is, I would love to hear about all the things
Sure,
that
I'm
you
happy to
go.
share it because I've
Okay.
been thinking, of course, a lot about it in the process of writing my book, Recovering You. I've thought a lot about it. And then also in the material that I've been reading, excuse me, since then, like The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And I also read What Happened to You by Dr.
Dr.
Bruce
Bruce Perry and Oprah
Perry and
Winfrey.
Oprah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
that was a really
so
powerful
good.
book to read too.
Yeah.
Just this trauma. And I never really thought about my experience with trauma until I was working with a therapist about 5 or 6 years ago. She brought it up and I thought, huh, because I, like many other people, think of trauma in a certain context, like the trauma that one experiences when you go off to war, or the trauma you experience when you are a victim of a violent act like a rape or a mugging or whatever, or a car accident. Or there's so many ways to one can experience trauma. And I love this whole conversation that we're having um, nationally and internationally about trauma,
Mhm.
and how what's that how we have these experiences in life that can be traumatic, and that if you've had a certain number of those experiences, it puts you in a different category, and that category doesn't necessarily predetermine what your life is going to be like, but it kind of indicates some possibilities. So it's caused me to look at my life, and sure, there's a lot of trauma in my upbringing. Both my parents carried a lot of trauma with them, being African American and dealing with racism, living in the South, moving to the North, a lot of generational trauma. So that was one of the things that I feel as though I inherited from them. And then also had my own personal experiences around that. Um, I was a very sensitive kid. And I think the way that my parents dealt with their trauma, which is much like the way I dealt with my trauma, which is to drink, to try
Mm.
to do drugs, or to somehow to self-soothe and self-regulate. I think
Right.
I feel as though I was trying to do that in so many different ways. Even when I was a child, I think back to how I would rock myself in bed to soothe myself.
Hmm.
And now I realize that that's a sign of a person who is trying to self-regulate and maybe did not get what they needed from their caregivers, because
Right.
our caregivers teach us how to self-regulate.
Hmm.
And so I was trying to do that for myself, biting my nails, picking my nose, picking my skin, eating, yeah, overeating. Those are ways that I was trying to self-regulate, self-soothe. And then eventually that evolved into um, having my first cigarette, having my first drink, having my first smoke. Um, and by the time those things came into my life, I was so ready because I felt so uncomfortable in my skin.
Hmm.
You add on top of that being gay. And when I was a young person, I didn't quite know exactly why I felt so different from other people, why I felt on the outside looking in. And I think that was definitely part of it. But by the time I had my first drink, my first drunk at the age of 15, I was so ready because I felt like I had been walking around holding my breath for years.
Yeah.
And then finally I could breathe because the alcohol made me feel normal. It helped me feel like I could connect, because my nature is to be more introverted. And for the longest time, I thought of that aspect of myself. I didn't know what it was, but I just knew that I was different. I felt like that was a deficit. I felt like there was something wrong with me. So
Mm.
when I was able to drink and start to suddenly feel like I was a part of instead of apart from, I felt like I'd found the answer.
I so relate to that feeling. Man, just the relief of that first drink after carrying these burdens around. Did your parents know that you were gay, or what was the process of coming
My
out?
my so when I first started to understand that I was gay probably around age 15.
Oh, right around the time you started drinking.
Yeah, 15, 14,
Yeah.
somewhere around there. And what happened for me is I always got messages from my family that that wasn't okay, that those people were not um good people, that they were sick people, all
Oh,
that stuff,
sick.
all that stuff. And so even though I didn't quite understand what it was all about, I knew that I identified with these people that my stepmother, that my father, my mother had classified as not good people. And
Not good
so
at
that
all.
just creates all kinds of stuff within you, shame and all that. And so when I finally came out, I came out to my sister, I came out to friends, very close friends when I was in high school. Didn't come out to my parents until I was maybe in my first year of college. And it was a shit show.
Was it?
It was bad.
But yours, did your sister take it well?
Yeah, my
Oh,
sister,
but your parents, they had
my
a
mother
problem.
kicked me out of the house
Oh
when she
my
found out.
goodness. Was that, I mean, you look like you have such a baby face. I would never be able to guess how old you are, but was that during
51.
its, oh my God. You have such a baby face. I was like, oh, you're like in your 30s. Okay. I was thinking, I don't know what I was thinking, but okay. So you and I are closer than I thought. So when we were coming up, that was not okay. Like when I was in high school, being gay, not okay. I know that there was this one boy who was gay and he was so outward. It was like he dressed like the Cure. Like he was like emo. Is that a
Good for
thing?
him.
Yeah, good for, well, I mean, he was
It was hard for him,
Chinese.
I'm sure.
Oh my God. He told me one time, he goes, I get called the F word, the other F word, once every, he goes, on an average of every 15 seconds. Like he was good with the math. He was Asian. I know, terrible, terrible. I don't, I just, my stereotype just came out on accident. Um, but he like calculated, he was barraged with negative messages all through high school. I'm surprised that child survived, because now we know, looking back, that a lot of, gay people don't survive high school, especially in our age group.
Mhm. I think had I not found alcohol and drugs, I probably would not have survived it. Had I
Same.
not found alcohol and drugs, and had I not been an artist, had I not had dance and theater
Mm,
and being a part of that community, that
mhm,
really kind of provided a bit of a refuge for me, I
mhm.
don't think I would have
Were
survived.
you in a drama club or anything like that? Yeah, you had community.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the high school that I went to had an arts program. And so
nice.
I was
Where
really
did you grow
fortunate.
up?
I grew up in Connecticut.
In Connecticut. Oh,
Mhm.
in the land
Like a,
of the white, in the land of the white people. Oh my God.
well, my town was very, very, very diverse and very mixed. And like
Oh, it was. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and the apartment building in the neighborhood I lived in was very, very
Diverse.
mixed. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
awesome. Okay,
yeah,
so at least you have that going on.
yeah.
Yeah, because all those things, I mean, so many of us feel terminally unique. We feel different, that the alcohol does feel like a shedding of the weights of the, yeah, I had that same experience. Okay, so fast forward to when you're a professional dancer, you did Lion King. That's amazing. Where did you perform Lion King? Was that like a all over the country kind of thing, or was it like Broadway kind of thing?
Well, it started off, I was hired to do the show in Toronto. So they had a Canadian company. And so I
Mhm.
was hired to do the show there. It's an interesting story around that. I auditioned for it one year because I saw the show and I just automatically saw myself in it. And that didn't happen oftentimes when I would go see shows. I could look on stage and I couldn't physically see myself during it.
Mm.
But that was different. I have, on a visceral level, I felt a connection to it. And one day on a whim, I went to an audition. I wasn't even fully prepared for it, but I went anyway. And there was probably like about 100, 125 guys there. And I made it down to like the last 8, maybe.
Oh,
And I didn't get the job, but that's okay. I felt so proud of myself after that day and that morning. When I left that studio, having been told thank you, but no thank you, I was like skipping down the street because I was so proud of myself. Fast forward a year later, I get a random phone call asking me to come back for an audition. And I went back thinking, okay, it'd be like before, it'd be about 100 guys. And no, it was just me. It was a private audition with the casting director and another person from the show. And within a couple of hours, I knew that I got the job. And like within a couple of weeks, I moved from New York to Canada and started my life with Disney's The Lion King. And I did
that's
that.
amazing.
I did that for like a year and change in Canada. Then I moved back to New York and did it on Broadway for a period of time. And then I went off on tour and did it for multiple years on tour. Then I made my way back to Broadway and did it for some more. So in total, I was with the show about 9 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's strange because I started off being not sober during my time with the show. And then suddenly being in that environment and getting sober, that was a trippy experience.
You got sober while you had that job?
Yeah.
Oh my,
Yeah.
okay. So I'm a little fuzzy on the sequence of events because I've been kind of jumping you all around. But
Yeah.
so you had that moment of clarity, and that's when you were with Lion King?
Yeah. Yeah. I was doing my first year living in Canada doing the show. And then I got sober in New York about maybe like a year later, a year and a half later. I was in New York doing the show and I got sober. And it was really challenging because theater is a place that there's always a party. There's always an opening night party. There's always a closing night party. We all work at night. You can go out and drink after the show, and then go home and not have to get up at the crack of dawn to go to work again. So it really kind of supports that kind of party lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I remember being in the dressing room, and I remember being with people in the dressing room who had liquor in the dressing room with them, like big bottles of vodka or rum on the shelf. Or I remember um, a member of the crew being a drug dealer, and that's where we would get coke from. And I remember he would come into the room every night at some point to do to do his job of being there and then some. And
His side
so
hustle.
yeah, the side hustle. And I remember just having, how do I navigate that?
Mm,
And that was kind of like how Living Sober, that book, kind of helped me piece some of that together. There are things that I could do to help myself live sober, even though I'm changing. The world around me is not going to change, but I need to find a way to make my way through it. So it was trippy. And then eventually I figured it out. I would go to meetings before the show sometimes, or if there's a 2-show day, I would go to a meeting in between shows. Everybody else is eating or taking a nap, and I was like down the block in a meeting because I needed that. So
how did you find 12-step meetings?
how did I find them in terms of how did it feel to be in them, or how did I
Well,
find
no, oh,
them?
like on a map. You know what I mean? I was introduced to 12-step meetings through a couple of clients. I was in a sales position. I worked for a transportation company, and 2 of my customers were in the program, and that kind of Eskimoed me in out of the cold, as they say. And so that's how I found it. How were you introduced to it? Did you have a friend that went, or did anybody bring you, or did you have to seek it out?
My friend Craig, who I mentioned a
Oh,
little
right.
earlier. Yeah,
Okay.
he was my first person that I knew was sober. I later realized that there were other people around me who were sober, and I just didn't even know.
We
Uh,
don't,
I walk into
we
the
are not
meeting, I was like,
attracted to those people.
yeah, I walk into the meeting, I was like, oh, I know you. Oh, I've seen you before. Oh my God, yeah. So that was really funny. But he took me to my first meeting, and I took to it like fish to water because it was just, it really touched me how people shared in the meetings about
Mhm.
their experiences. And I had never shared any of that stuff with anybody. Craig was the person that I started to share that stuff with, but it was just so amazing to hear people talk about their experiences that they were, at one point felt very shameful about. And now they've gotten to a point where they feel less shame about it. They've been able to even laugh about it too, and get some perspective and some healing around it. So I loved it. I love hearing people's stories. I still
Yeah.
love hearing people's stories. That's why I'm so grateful that I still like meetings. I still like
Yeah.
meetings.
Yeah.
So that's how I found it. And Craig suggested that I go to meetings, of course, do 90 meetings in 90 days.
Mhm.
And he suggested that I get a service commitment.
Mhm.
And I think my first service commitment was setting up chairs at a meeting,
Mhm.
and maybe even making coffee at a
Mhm.
beginner's meeting. And that was great. That was great because it got me
Yeah.
there every week.
Yeah, I loved service. It was so funny because I've been going to meetings for a long time too, and I often found that you meet people in the meetings and you think I would never be friends with that person. Like there's too much of an age difference or socioeconomic. There's too much of a difference. We're not going to relate to each other. And then you get into service, and then you get lumped together with those people, right? And then you spend time with them, and you start talking this language of recovery that crosses all boundaries. And when you start talking about feelings, then these connections happen. And I would realize, wow, we are so much more alike than different, or we have so much in common. And I would have to take a step back and be like, wow, I prejudged somebody, and now I have this experience of taking a little bit of time with someone in a service capacity where I never want to do service. I like always dread it. And then I go do it. Do you do that too? Like, oh God, I committed to this thing. And then I never want to go. And then I go, and then my heart is full and I'm skipping as I leave. And I'm like, why did I even, why do I always dread it? But yeah, service. I love you said the 90 and 90 and service commitment, because that's super important for people that are new to 12 step.
Yeah, and just that whole thing about meetings and community. That's one of the things that I talk about in the book a lot, which is just how important social support is and how important community is. I could never have done this by myself.
Yeah.
And the people who've gotten clean on their own, I applaud them for being able to do that, but I also hope for them that they find some sense of community and some kind of connection if they haven't found it already. Kind of like that woman who you talked about
Yeah.
earlier, who
Yeah.
gotten sober without any kind of support, and then some years later she found her way to
Yeah.
that and started to take those steps. And I acknowledge, and I think it's important for me to always remember that everybody has their own path.
Hmm.
There isn't one way to do this recovery thing. That there are
Agreed.
lots of different ways that we can get to a place of transformation and change. And
Hmm.
what each person needs is not exactly the same. And it's important to, as we grow and recover and change, it's important to pay attention to the things that resonate with you, that feed you,
100%.
and give yourself the permission to follow that, and to trust that, which is tricky because in recovery, I think in addiction, we learn to not trust ourselves because we've done so many things that that led us to places that we didn't really want to be in.
Yeah.
But I always, through the pages of the book, I try to encourage people to listen to that still small voice inside of them and start to listen to that higher wisdom that we all have access to.
Hmm.
Um, but sometimes we have to clear some stuff out of the way and look at some stuff and examine some stuff and work through some stuff in order for that to grow and be something that we begin to learn and trust and rely upon.
I have found that it is, to me, the still small voice that's inside, that's the voice of God. As I define it. Um, because there's the saying that I got into the Course in Miracles or early. Yeah, you like it. Yeah. So I got into that when I was early in my sobriety. And one of the lines that stuck out for me was the ego speaks first and the ego speaks loudest. And that's why it was so important for me. And I'm glad that in the 12 steps, they talk about prayer and meditation, be still and know that I am God is, something that it's like, oh, that's another affirmation that that still small voice is going to have my best interest at heart. Like your ego is not your amigo, right? It's loud. It's like, it's reactive. It's defensive. It's fearful. So getting like, but what I loved about community is that we can talk to people who get our kind of crazy and we can siphon that off. And then that's when you can hear the still small voice that's so important. And what a good point that you brought up, that it is tricky in the beginning because there is that, oh, I can't trust myself because I did all these things I didn't want to do. But we also have to consider that we were high when we when we did a lot of
Yeah.
that stuff, right?
Yeah. And I think it's important in this recovery process to learn to trust yourself. And
Yeah,
it's just one of those things that it's a process. It takes time, but
yeah,
if you keep showing up and doing the work, you get to that point,
abs-
as you should.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your book. So, Recovering You, Soul Care, and Mindful Movement for Overcoming Addiction. And I had started out saying that, I've been sober for a while, but I just kind of got that feeling over the last couple of years, like this intuitive need that's like, you know what, I need to sort of do that somatic healing. Tell me a little bit about, and by the way, you and I have been doing Qigong together for the last couple of weeks in preparation.
That was
You're
you. I felt you. I felt you. Like you were in the room
so
with me.
funny. You have so many videos on your YouTube channel, and I was able to do some basic things and then sort of like pick and choose. And I love the arm swinging. I don't know what that's called, but anyway, I did a bunch of stuff. It was really helpful. It did move the energy. Right. Like I lost my mother a year ago and I've been going through a grieving process, and it is that grief is stuck in my body. And this is what I got out of your videos is I felt it move. I felt it move. So thank you so much for all your videos. They were amazing. Um, but I want to talk about your book because uh, going through the process of writing is a very, it can well, maybe you should just tell me what your experience was like. Because me as a writer, sometimes it's really hard to like get it all out. What was the process of writing it like for you?
First of all, my condolences to you for
Thank
losing
you.
your
You're so
mom.
sweet.
And I'm glad that the videos have been helping you.
So huge. Yeah.
Yeah, it's powerful medicine. You don't even have to know a lot about the movement in qigong in order for the medicine to do its work.
Mm,
The process of writing Recovering You was really a magical experience. And when I say magical, I don't mean that it was sunshine and rainbows the whole year that I was writing it. It was challenging to
so
do that.
challenging.
It was challenging to look back at my life because it's part memoir
Mhm.
and then also part practical tools that we can use in our recovery no matter. And I wrote it in a way to meet anyone on their recovery journey wherever they're at, whether at the beginning of it, in the middle of it, or whether they have a lot of time.
Beautiful.
um but it was one of the things that it was for me, and it kind of goes back to that mantra that I told you about before, was being reminding myself that I am enough as I write this book, that what I have to share in terms of my experiences, in terms of the tools that I've gathered over the years that helped me and has the power to help others, is important to share, and that I have coming to this moment for a reason. I am the one
Mm.
who is to deliver this message in the way that only I can, and that's enough. And I don't have to be Dr. Bessel van der Kolk in order to do that. I can be just Stephen Washington,
Mhm.
with all of my experience, strength, and hope. So that was a really powerful experience to have. And that whenever my itty bitty shitty committee in my head would tell me that what I just wrote didn't make sense, or why are you saying that, or who are you to think that you could do this, I would get into the habit of saying, "Oh, thanks for sharing, but I'm busy. I have to write a book. I
I'm
can't.
busy.
I got a deadline. I signed a contract and I have a deadline.
Yeah.
And also I signed a contract with myself
Mm.
to be in the sacred process and experience. So and it was a great opportunity to do that thing that we talked about a little bit, you and I, earlier, about
Mhm.
asking for help, how
Mhm.
important it is to ask for help. And I think one of the greatest spiritual practices I've taken on in my life is that practice of asking for help, and that it's a gift that kind of keeps on giving. I
Uh-huh.
think the process of asking for help changes and shifts and morphs over time, and it never isn't necessary or important. It's
Mhm.
always important to do that. And writing this book was another example of that. I needed help to write this book. I had a wonderful writing coach slash editor who helped me move through the process and would look at everything that I had written and offer suggestions, and it was great. And I walked into this experience thinking that, oh, when you write a book, it's just you and your laptop or whatever, and you just write, and then you turn it into to a publisher. And no, it's a lot more involved. It's a lot more to involved in the process of crafting a manuscript
Mm.
that's fit to print.
It's fit to print. Did you
Yeah.
find that during that process you had it was a way to have clarity around ideas that maybe you were not as clear about?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you asked that question. This book was based on an online course that I made several years before, and it
Mm.
had a different title then. And when I created that course, something inside of me knew that that was going to be just the beginning of the conversation that I was going to have with people about recovery and these practices and how they can be useful to others. And so when I began to put pen to paper, the it all began to unfold more and more about this process and what it was going to be and what it wasn't going to be and what it needed to be.
Mm.
Um, and it was an incredibly rewarding experience. At one point at the beginning, I thought, oh my God, this is so difficult. I'll never do this again.
And now
And
you're
then
like, I'm gonna write the next one.
and then 3/4 of the way in, and at the end, I was like, oh, okay, I can do that again. That wasn't so bad. That's okay. That was cool.
That was cool. Yeah. I mean, listen, congratulations. It's a huge accomplishment.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, where can people find this book?
The book can be found on Amazon or other booksellers.
Okay.
You can find the book there. You can also find them in bookstores. It's also available on Audible, an
Is it on
audiobook.
Audible?
Yes, Audible
Did
in
you
my
do it?
voice, in my voice.
Oh, I have a
Yeah.
credit. I might
Oh,
have to.
great.
Yeah, so interesting. I am so obsessed with um, Audible. I have tons of books that it's hard for me to read paper books anymore because I like to be putzing around the house or whatever. But I love that you did it in your own voice because then it'll be
Yes.
like me and you was hanging out while I was.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the audiobook comes with a PDF that has a lot of the movement exercises in it and other
Oh,
key information so that you have a
okay.
companion
A
piece to
companion.
that, because I think I of course describe the exercises in the audiobook, but it helps to have a visual. So you
Yeah.
have the PDF for that. And also on my website, where you can also purchase the book there,
Which,
stephenwashingtonexperience.com.
oh, that's right.
There's also a video that I made of all the exercises in the book, the sequence. I provided that for people because I think we all learn in different ways. I know
Oh,
that I'm
yeah.
more of a kinesthetic learner,
Me
a
too.
visual learner, so that's there. And yeah, so there's many places that you can find the book. And I always think of this book as a holistic guide to self-care in recovery, but I think it's also something that's helpful to anyone and everyone because we all need self-care. I
Mhm.
think it's important for people who love people who are dealing with addiction. I think it's a
Oh, that's a
powerful
big
book for
one.
people, for family, friends, loved ones, because I think that through my voice and also through the voices of my friends in recovery who I interviewed for parts of the book,
Mm.
it provides a lot of experience. And I think that people who aren't dealing with addiction within themselves, it will give them an opportunity to understand their loved one perhaps a little bit more, and also provide self-care tools so that they can take better care of themselves because it's stressful. It's stressful holding space for someone who's struggling with addiction. So it's
Absolutely.
something that everyone could benefit from. And I think of this book as the beginnings of people crafting a holistic self-care routine for themselves. And I think of a lot of the work that you described on my YouTube channel, but also in my membership communities, SWE Studio, short for Stephen Washington Experience Studio. It's my membership community where I provide Pilates and Qigong fusion classes and meditations and other mindfulness and wellness products. And it's a whole library of content for people to continue their self-care um, practice with me. Because I think it's important that in order for self-care to really be effective, we have to be consistent with it.
Mm,
And I really
huge.
wanted to provide a library of tools that people could use to help themselves.
So important. Yeah. I like that you have the library that people can help themselves, but it also has community, which, you and I both agree is huge.
Yeah, the community in my membership community is incredible. How people show up for one another and
Yeah.
support one another and welcome one another and encourage each other. It's really
Yeah.
beautiful to watch. And I feel really it holds a special place in my heart to be able to create this container and to see
Mhm.
what people have done within this container to help
Yeah.
themselves and to help each other. So it's just such a gift.
It is. I mean, you created the safe space for people, which I mean, I just feel it in your energy and your intention. You've clearly done your own work. I can sniff it out in 2 seconds if people haven't done their work. You know how it is like,
Yeah.
oh, you hear listen to people talk for a few minutes, like, oh, you're not there yet.
And as you know, it's ongoing. Like the work is
It's
never
always
really
ongoing.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're in the practice. You've been consistent for a long time. I can totally tell from your demeanor and your energy that you are well loved by you. Yeah.
Back at you. Back at you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, listen, I so enjoyed our time together today. I found a new BFF. I so appreciate your videos that you have so generously shared. I'm going to leave links to you have so many resources. I'm going to leave links to all the things in the show notes. So if you're driving, listening to this and didn't get to write it down, not to worry, just go to the website. Stephen, thank you so much for your time today. You are just a lovely, bright light, and I'm so glad that we got this time together.
Thank you so much, Arlena. It's so great to spend this time with you. I had a feeling that we were going to get on like a house on fire, and we did not disappoint.
We did not disappoint. You're adorable. Oh my God, I'll give you 10 minutes to stop that. Thank you so much. So much.
Oh,
We'll talk again soon.
yes. Bye bye.